our strategy segment this week, we're going to look at a hand from Dara's recent second place finish in the Killarney Highroller. It features as one of its villains the ultimate winner, Upeshka De Silva, who Dara knows very well. He is, of course, the man who beat him heads up for a WSOP bracelet 3 years ago. At this point of the tournament, it's three-handed, so no doubt there are plenty of dynamics at play. There's a button ante of 30k. The blinds are 15-30. Payouts are 30k, 20k, 16k for you and the remaining two players. And the stacks, as you said, they're roughly level. I think everyone has between 60 and 70 bigs. It's fair to say that it begins in a non-standard way, though, Dara. Adam Daniel limps the button, and you decide to just complete in the small blind with aces, setting the trap for Pesh in the big blind, I guess, who may pounce on this perceived weakness from both of you. It also disguises the strength of your hand for post-flop, so you might get paid big by a top pair type of hand, I guess. There are some drawbacks to this type of line. Would you mind speaking about the potential pitfalls of this flat and why in-game with the dynamics you liked it as a bit of randomization?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to explain, this is the first time I got to the last three of a tournament that had a button ante, and I didn't actually realise that the button ante was going to be so big because we played shorthand the previous day, and every time the table dropped below 5 or less, the ante is halved. So I was kind of expecting the ante to be 15, 15 and 30. But as the TD pointed out, the reason why they do that is to not put people at a shorthanded table at a disadvantage relative to other tables. When there's only one table left in the tournament, they use the full ante. That actually makes the pot very big and kind of forces you to play nearly most of your hands because there are 2.5 big blinds out there every time and there's only 3 of you. So if you sit back and fold a lot, you're going to blind down pretty quickly. I was kind of in a weird spot because I was out of position to Pesh 2 of the 3 hands, and Pesh is obviously a very aggro player and the other guy was also playing very aggro. So in my mind, when we got three-handed with the stacks being level, I thought if I sit back to some degree and play tighter than I would normally, there's a very good chance these two guys will go to war and I'll be able to get heads up without having to take any risks. So that was kind of my overriding strategy. On the one hand, I had to play a lot of hands because of the big button ante. But on the other hand, I didn't want to play a lot of big pots and risk busting in third when there was a good chance the other two guys would get it all in, as actually happened in game. Now, because I was completing most small blinds, I can't just do that with all the junk. I have to do it with strong hands as well. And Pesh was raising quite a bit. The pitfall, as you say, is I really don't want Pesh not to raise. But then on the other hand, I do have a very strong disguised hand. And I think I need to have aces sometimes in my completing range, just for post-flop. So I felt in game, first of all, just for the metagame reasons, it was a good spot to flat. I was more likely to get raised by Pesh. And secondly, I thought for sort of theoretical reasons, I actually need to show them that I can have super strong hands in these spots so that I can play well post-flop.
Fair enough. Well, you do complete in the small blind, as you said, and Pesh, unfortunately, does elect to just check back.
Yeah, the thing about Pesh is, like, I played with him 4 hours heads up as well, as you mentioned, for a bracelet once. His raising range tends to be super polarized in these spots. He'll raise a much wider range of hands for value because of his image, but then he'll also raise absolute junk, like 8-2 suited a lot as well. So I thought it wasn't just the stronger hands he would raise. So when he checks, I kind of think he has sort of like neither a great nor a horrible hand, something in the middle.
Okay, well, to the flop, it comes the Jack of Diamonds, 7 of Hearts, 5 of Spades. Rainbow flop, obviously villains can have quite wide ranges in this spot, so it is possible that there are some 2 pairs lurking. That being said, you do have the well-disguised over pair. You could obviously lead out in this spot. You could, however, take a different route.
I could lead out here, but I didn't like leading into 2 players, but I think leading is certainly an option. If I were to lead, I think I would prefer a stronger hand than aces or a weaker hand that has the better chance to improve than aces. So Jack 7-5 rainbow, if I had like 8-9 suited, one of the suits on board, so I'd have a gut shot and a backdoor flush draw, I think that'd be a reasonable hand to lead because obviously it's great for me if they both fold. If they both call, I can improve a lot. Or if I had, some sort of weird 2 pair, Jack 7, I think that'd be a good hand to lead as well. So that's how I'd balance my leading range. Hand like aces, when it's ahead, is likely to stay ahead. So it doesn't benefit as much from the other 2 players folding when we lead out, and it doesn't have as much possibility to improve when it's behind. So I felt it was a better check. So I checked, and Pesh checked, and Adam also checked.
I like how you split your range there between 2 pair type hands and backdoor with potential type of hands with gut shots. I think they have the right amount of equity in this situation. I think when you lead out and get called by one of these guys, you're going to be out of position going forward, and you're probably going to end up going into a defensive mode where you just check call down because you don't really love a pot where you bet the turn and get raised. So you're more likely to check a lot of turns hoping that, your opponent will fire one more street and that will be how you get your value.
Yeah, there's also no real harm to letting a free card in this spot. Most of their hands that are behind have very little equity against me. It's not a super draw heavy board. There's not too many likely 2 pairs out there. I think they will bet all their 1 pair hands themselves, so I don't need to bet to get value from those hands.
Okay, well, to the turn, it comes the 9 of diamonds. Not a total brick, obviously completes some stuff there, but a lot of that stuff might bet itself on the flop. Dara, you lead out at this point 50k into a pot of 120k. Both players call.
Yeah, I think all 3 players have super wide ranges now.
Yeah, it's reasonable to think that a jack would have bet the flop, but maybe some weak jacks are possibly out there. Definitely a 9 could be in either hand. Definitely a 7 or even a 5. Definitely some draws. Diamonds are there. That's a possible draw. We could have a hand like Queen 10. That's definitely possible now too. So yeah, both of these guys have very wide ranges. So having got 2 calls, the pot is now 270k. And the bottom pair pairs, the 5 pairs. It's the 5 of clubs, so no backdoor flush. Not a terrible card for you because you now overtake some of the middly 2 pairs with a better 2 pair. But also not a brilliant card because someone could have a 5 out there. And of course, someone could still have the straight and be playing it slower. So it's a tough one, actually. I watched this one when you shared it on Share My Pair, I think quite soon after, and I was pretty on the fence about whether I would bet or check this river.
Yeah, like you say, it's a really mixed river because on the turn I am sort of targeting 7s and 5s. Now, when a 5 comes, it should be pointed out that makes it less likely that the opponents have a 5 because obviously there's only 2 5s left compared to 3 7s. So if you think their range going to the river was 7x and 5x, the 7x is now a bigger part of that range. But obviously, it's highly possible one of the 2 of them has the remaining 5. My thinking in game was that a 7 won't bet now for sure. There's no way a 7 bets. So if I check and one or both of them have a 7, it'll just check around and I won't get any value from a 7. A 5 is going to bet itself, but it might not raise if I lead, depending on the 5. Because obviously there are 2 straights possible. There are all sorts of houses possible as well. So it's not like a 5 is the nuts. So the choice is between check calling or betting myself.
Yeah, it does feel like it could be a negative free roll situation if we don't bet. You, in-game, elect to bet 150k into 270, targeting exactly the hands you described there. Obviously, if you were to face a raise, this would put you in a wonky spot.
It's definitely a wonky one if I'm getting raised. To be honest, I wasn't expecting to be getting raised very much. Or at least I didn't expect to get bluff raised, let's say. Because like I said, part of my reason for betting is I don't think they're going to bluff very much. And if I don't think they're going to bluff very much, then if I get raised, I have to assume they're not bluffing. The other thing is, there's nothing to stop me from having some sort of weird house as well. 9-5 suited or 7-5 suited or Jack-5 suited. Any of those hands, they're all possible. And both players have to worry about the other guy in the pot as well, who also has an uncapped range. There's nothing to stop any of them having a weird house as well, or even quads.
So in a sense, your thin value bet here with aces, ironically, it is a thin value bet, even though it is a big pocket pair pre-flop that's been played deceptively. It is protected by those 9-5s and 7-5s, I guess, for being bluffed out.
Exactly. No, I felt my range was completely protected because my range is uncapped in this spot. So I wasn't too worried about that. And like you say, it is a thin value bet because, they can have a 5. And actually on the turn, I thought 5x was a large part of both of their range. They can have both straights. They can have a lot of houses as well. So aces is really just targeting Jack X, 7x and 9x. But it's actually losing to a lot of hands as well.
So in game, Pesh does decide to raise. He actually goes all in for quite a chunky 1.5 million, which I think is enough to maybe not quite put you all in, but like more or less it's going to be next to all of your chips. He's doing that knowing there's a player behind him who could have a boat. So that's a very strong line from him there. Unlikely to contain a lot of bluffs, although if there was a man who was capable of finding one in this spot, Pesh is that type of player. But I would say that would be seriously dangerous with you uncapped and the villain behind who absolutely could have boated up in this spot.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is completely right. Pesh, while he's very aggro, I've never seen him do a crazy bluff like this, which would be ICIM suicide as well. There's 3 equal stacks. He obviously feels he has a skill edge over both players, so he doesn't need to take a high wire spot like this and assume that I can fold. He would be bluffing into an uncapped range, 2 uncapped ranges actually. The other thing which was relevant is that as Pesh was considering what to do, I was watching Adam to also see what he was doing, and it was pretty clear to me that Adam was folding. He was shuffling his cards impatiently. So if Pesh picked up on that, he knew that he didn't have to worry about Adam anymore, unless Adam was doing some sort of weird reverse tell. So that could have been a factor as well. So when Pesh shoved, I obviously felt pretty sick, and it took me a while to fold, even though, like I say, I didn't feel that he would bluff in this spot. My hand is sort of very underrepresented.
That makes a lot of sense. I have to say, in this spot, though, I always feel a little frustrated at our third man in the menage a trois here, Adam Daniel, who, if he is just giving away the fact that he's disinterested, it creates another huge problem for you, because you seeing him disinterested and you seeing Pesh recognizing his disinterest means that you're not as protected as you should be in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I think Pesh probably did pick up on it. That said, I don't think Pesh would have shoved. I felt that if Pesh wanted to bluff, he could have just raised to something like 550. And that's still going to shake out my 9x and 7x hands. And I don't think he has to think that he has to target a hand as strong as aces to bluff out. So the sizing just did seem like value to me. It was like, he's not going to believe I have a hand now, and he's going to talk himself into making a call here.
And in fact, given that the presumption would be you would raise a lot of pocket pairs pre-flop, Jack 5 feels like a kind of as nutty as it could be. So he could very well have Jack 5 and just decide, well, do you know what, I'm just going to try and get the lot from 9-5 here. Dara won't be able to fold 9-5.
Absolutely, yeah, that would be good thinking. And Jack 5 is exactly the type of hand that I thought he could have pre-flop. Jack 5 off, 7-5 off, 9-5 off. I don't think any of those hands would raise. They're sort of not garbage enough to turn into a bluff, and they're certainly not strong enough to raise for value. So yeah, those are exactly the type of hands I thought he could have. After I eventually did fold, and obviously it was pretty clear I was in the agonies, Pesh didn't show his hand, and Pesh actually shows cards a lot. He'd done this the previous day as well, which I actually like. I mean, I know players always say that you shouldn't show your cards because you give away information, but I think Pesh is very good at manipulating his image based on his shows, and he will show bluffs, and he'll show when he makes big folds as well, or when he had it. I think the one pattern I spotted in Pesh's shows is that he likes to show in spots where he thinks by showing he can upset and possibly tilt the opponent. So
I like them myself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if he makes a big fold, which was clearly correct, he'll show it, and then you'll think, oh my god, how did he fold that hand? How do I get chips out of this guy? Similarly, if he bluffs you, he'll show it to possibly get under your skin and tilt you. So I felt the fact that he didn't show here was kind of significant. I think he would have loved to have been able to show a bluff. Yeah,
I'd have to share your hunch there. I think people who tend to like to show the bluff to tilt the opponent, particularly an opponent that you might be going heads up within 15 minutes time or whatever it happens to be. I think it's very telling when they don't give away that information when they could. So I would share your hunch in that situation. I think it's a fascinating hand. I think it's really interesting how the hand developed and certainly the river spot. But I think maybe the most interesting thing for a lot of our listeners is the trappy line you took pre-flop, something I think people probably don't associate with your game. I feel like your reputation is that of someone who maybe takes good standard lines, makes calibrated bets, diverges from GTO occasionally, but not too often. But I, of course, as someone familiar with your game and approach to these types of spots, know that a move like this is commonplace, know that you do have that little trappy instinct when you want to as well. And I guess now the whole world does too.
Yeah, it's interesting when I put this hand up and share my pair, and I do that quite a lot, obviously, when the most interesting hands from my tournaments. And most of the time they generate a certain amount of discussion, but nothing too heated. This one got incredibly heated, with at least half the people couldn't get past the idea that, like, oh my god, you had aces and you didn't raise pre-flop. What on earth are you doing? You deserve everything you got for the way the hand worked out. But in-game, I did feel it was sort of a low-frequency play, maybe something I should be doing 10% or less of the time, just so that I can have aces in my range. Like, I've done a lot of study recently on what we should do when we get 3-bet and we're out of position. And one thing I've learned is that we do sometimes have to call with aces, even though we prefer raising with aces, obviously. And raising with aces is more plus EV in a vacuum, but we need to have aces in our flatting range. So I felt it was a similar spot. So actually, this was the hand that I thought the most about when I came home, and I ran it through Snowy and Hold'em Resources Calculator. And the interesting thing was that Hold'em Resources Calculator does recognize that aces is more plus EV to raise than to call, but it's not actually as much as people think. It's only 0.07% in equity terms more profitable to raise than to call. And actually, Hold'em Resources Calculator at equilibrium raises 94% of the time and does call 6% of the time. So it is okay as a sort of a non-standard low-frequency play.
And I think very importantly, and maybe a good final point, is that with ICM considerations and quite big ones three-handed as well, as you said, keeping pots small, going for that sort of tippy-tappy approach while your two aggro opponents were more likely to get into big pots against one another. That adds another reason why keeping the pot smaller, so 0.7%, doesn't seem very significant. That seems like the kind of amount of equity you could waive in that situation to keep the pot small.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's 0.07%. So it's like €40 or something is what I'm giving up there. So not particularly big in the context of the tournament. The post-flop was interesting too. Obviously, the pot plays out three-handed, so PO can't help us. There is no game theory solution. So I use Snowy, which is artificial intelligence, and Snowy operates by playing out situations and hands millions and millions of time and trying to work out what works out most profitable for it. And Snowy kind of backed up my view that this was a very difficult spot and all the decisions were very close. On the flop, it thinks leading and checking have exactly the same EV, so either option is fine. On the turn, it actually prefers checking again, but again, it's super close. And then on the river, it thinks that leading is better than checking. But the thing about Snowy is it doesn't take ICM into consideration, and it's actually pretty close between checking and betting again. So it's possible that in a tournament, the check call line is actually better. When it faces the shove, Snowy calls 42% of the time and folds 58% of the time. And again, it thinks it's a dead heat between those two. Again, because ICM isn't taken into account by Snowy, that's chip EV. So in a tournament, it's clearly correct to fold, because if it's only break even in chip EV, it's going to be losing money, dollar EV.
That makes sense. Well, Dara, a fascinating hand. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. I'm sorry you came second to Pesh once again. I reckon third time will be the charm. Hopefully it's in a big one.